Alright, so this video is going to be me spitballing, excuse me, spitballing for a general master plan for right-wing victory throughout Europe and North America. It's a work in progress. I just came up with the idea to do it right before I started this video, basically, and so it's not necessarily the best. And I don't actually have a plan for making the video on a plan, but I'm going to muddle through it, and we'll see if it can be refined and so on. But a general layout, strategic layout, sort of, because I don't see anyone else doing much of this at all, and I figure someone should do it basically to give people an idea of the next level, because I see everyone running around with like chickens with their heads cut off, and like fighting the fight, but not coherently organizing and so on to take the centers of power. You know. Okay, so the first thing is recruitment and indoctrination. The left wing took over the institutions through women and emphasis on women, and the left is a very effeminate movement. And the right is a very masculine movement, generally speaking. The left wants matriarchy and socialism. The right wing wants capitalism and patriarchy. The left wants atheism and Islam. The right wants Christianity, basically. And maybe a little Nordic paganism or something like that, or Celtic paganism. They're tolerable. Given what we know about 15 to 20% of the population being pedophiles, sociopaths, psychopaths, and narcissists, we have our work cut out for us, where 1 out of 5 people are predatory on the rest of humanity, their fellow man, and that includes women, of course, preying on women and preying on by women. It's a pretty solid thing. Maybe replace sociopath with histrionic or borderline personality disorder or something like that. And the woman's thing is about the same as the men's, basically, in the 15 to 20% range. So we got our work cut out for us. 1 out of 5 people is neurologically designed to predate, be a predator on the rest of humanity. And one of the things they do is they inculcate or bring in other people of the 80%. They don't just recruit amongst themselves and say, hey, look, you're like me, let's join forces. They kind of invite the 80% to participate or let slide and be ideologically captured to let slide, as if it's a good thing, terrible behaviors. Like this multiculturalism and child rape thing and so on. It's like, oh, well, we can't execute child rapists because they're all foreigners and we need to be nice to foreign people. So it's like, okay, the general material for a desired world is being formulated, but the actual action plan to get there is not being formulated. The specific ebb and flow of discourse and so on is not being anticipated or anything like that. So I thought I would outline some stuff and then kind of think through maybe a logical step-by-step process, if I can do that this time, and if not, I'll try it for later. It'll be a project of mine. To explain the overall mechanisms and general strategy and so on, with a few specific details on important pieces. That's the end goal, to have a plan that actually says the enemy will do this at this time or in this situation, and therefore we can do X or Y or Z based on what they do. I'm probably going to fail in this video, but at least I'll point in the right direction to that end, and eventually maybe I'll make a proper video where I actually have slept on this and thought about it for a while and actually anticipated properly and so on. But the thing is, we've been watching the name of the game for some time, so we got the pieces all on the board basically now in terms of these things, and we hit the Epstein pedal list, and that's what made me really start going like I have to snap and perform as best as I can because holy shit, the entire Western elite are corrupt and in on this. So that's the level of fight we're dealing with basically. So recruitment and propaganda, or initiation and into wisdom and education and finding comrades. The boomers might be a lost cause for the right wing. They're relatively entitled and so on. But we can get the younger generations. The boys like manly men and so on. So the idea is to promote people who have virtues that are physical courage or mental toughness and certain mind intelligence and general trend of learning from mistakes and being correct on a number of things. Competency, in other words, in diagnosing civilization's issues and listing potential solutions. Now, like I said, this is being done piecemeal at the moment. There's no master plan to all this chaos and so on. There's just a general sort of like, we have to push forward, go forwards, and so on. So it's a very World War I trench-style warfare or tribal warfare, kind of like whoever's most aggressive and so on wins. But a proper discipline could instill some potency that punches above one's weight from what they would consider to be physically normally or socially or institutionally normally. Rupert Lowe's Restore Britain is a good example of this kind of process being done. But it's like, how does the right-wing influencer culture possibly manage this and so on? And the reason why I bring Epstein up is because Trump is now going like, oh, there is no Epstein list, there never was, even though we said there was and so on for 10 years and so on. And it's like, okay. So the destruction of the West through socialism and mass immigration is the plan. The predators want civilization ruined so that it's easier to prey as predators on the rest of humanity and so on. And part of their plan involves getting normal people, the 80% of relatively normal people, in on the that's the thing. As V for Vendetta said, if you want to look for the guilty, you need only to look in a mirror. And as George Orwell points out, Winston is part of the outer party, and he is part of censoring everything with Newspeak, even as he's against it and trying to resist it. And the island, as Feral Historian points out, the number one guy is actually the guy who's resisting the system on the island. The Prisoners, the TV series name. But the guy on the secluded island is basically the number one guy, and then it turns into a chimpanzee and so on. So there's a bit of commentary about the evolutionary drives and pressures and so on. What else? And basically about the prisoner thing. The guy basically who's resisting the system unmasks number one in charge and so on, and finds out it's him, and then it pans it. What's it called? The screen flips to his face, and then he's like laughing or something like that, and then like the screen flips back to number one, and his face is a chimpanzee. So it's like, okay, Anyways, uh, Solzhenitsyn basically says everyone participated in the Stalinist system. And one of the nightmares about totalitarianism is precisely that it turns children against their own parents. Children will turn their parents into the state for minor things like, oh, I don't like mass immigration. And I know that turning your parent in if they rape you as a child is like one thing, but turning them in because they don't like mass immigration because it leads to child rape is a completely different thing. Um, you know, there. I think one of the tricks that we need to do at first, right now, is establish shaming for being stupid. Basically, shaming people for trusting the establishment narrative. And the establishment is not just like whichever party happens to be in charge, but it's the entire post-war liberal consensus and so on, or most of it. Maybe not all of it, literally. Like we don't actually want Hitler in charge again or something like that. You know, despite what some retarded Zoomers say from the Nick Fuentes camp and so on, and Zoomer historian and so on. But shaming for believing the old media, the liberal media, the hippies, those people, as post-war consensus dumbasses who destroyed the world for us, basically. And like that language needs to be like clear and concise on that dimension, basically. And it needs to be promoted as the way to view it and so on. There needs to be a decoupling of loyalty to the post-war consensus and so on. Pointing out that the post-war consensus in the 2000s, early 2000s, was tolerable, but it's now destructive with this mass immigration support and so on. So that system is old and dying, basically. And that what we need is a new order rooted in the traditions of the past from before World War II to some extent, with minimal influence by the post-war consensus of World War II onwards. It's not a full return to tradition. There might be a tolerability to a minimal amount of the post-World War II consensus, but generally shaming for not being traditional enough in terms of the general outlook on worldview, on life, evil, good, and masculinity and femininity is part of it. Now, I think people are already doing that and they're cluing in on it already. So that's like step one of the process, but we need to kind of up our game in terms of like reaching out to people and like, talking to a baby boomer and going like, hey, look at this post-war consensus. Isn't that so retarded? They actually believe women are equal to men and stuff. It's sort of like low-key shaming them if they have those beliefs, and then they go, oh, I don't think that at all. And I'm like, well, you're not a dumbass, are you? You don't actually believe that, and so on. It's a bit of a hostile tactic, but it needs to be done to cow them and shame them and so on, because a lot of these people operate on social conditioning They don't operate on facts or anything like that. So there needs to be a purposeful drive towards shaming people that believe the post-war consensus and feminism and so on. And like a general hostility towards it and so on. And that will lead them to complaining about hate speech and so on, and they'll probably try and crack down on that and so on, but whatever. Shaming works. That's why they hate it, because it forces them to change because they know they're wrong. But and calling people, suggesting people are on the Epstein list because they allow pedophiles to run rampant in our countries is, like, for instance, if Starmer were to invite 7,000 immigrants from Afghanistan into the country of the UK, right? You go, oh, of course Starmer would want people who rape children 40 times as much as the average British person into the country. He's probably on the Epstein list, and he wants to make more victims. You know what I mean? Like that kind of like really hostile, underhanded sort of tactic. It's sort of like asking someone when they stop beating their wife, sort of. You know what I mean? Like call into question these things and like go like, are you on the Epstein list? You act like it, and so on. And just really put them on the horns of a dilemma and force them on the back foot emotionally and mentally and so on. Browbeating these people publicly, constantly, and so on until they quit putting themselves out is a very big and important step, because then it ruins their ability to propagandize if they're too ashamed to actually put out their views and so on. Recruiting people into our new worldview and system based on historical facts and better studying of the intricate details of history and so on is a part of it, but it's like you have to invite and advertise. So it's like join the basket weavers where you'll find your manliness and again and so on through quiet mutual interests outside of politics, basically. Because one of the things about the right wing is that it separates the civil sphere or civic sphere from the political sphere. If you do that, then the leftists, the personal is political types, lose any traction and society starts to heal again. And that's one of the things about us as right-wingers is we don't want the political to be personal, or the personal to be political, rather. We want room for people to ignore politics and still have a good life on some level. Like, does politics belong in church, for instance? You know? Now, there might be a room for it at the moment to say the personal is political on the right wing, but the goal of the right wing is to make it so that that's not doable. So it's like a discarding sabot. Now, discarding sabot is like a shell in a tank's gun that you fire. And basically, immediately after clearing the tank's gun barrel, the shell casing falls apart into two halves that fall away, and a dart encased inside the two halves of the shell emerges from them, and it provides an armor-piercing focus through sheer physical. It's almost like a knife, or, well, it is a dart, basically, but it's in a shell case. So the idea is that the personal is political for the right wing is like the shell casing, and the sabot is the actual payload you want to deliver, which is the personal is not political. Um, basket weaving, hobbies, interest groups, stuff like that. Keep the woman out of them, generally speaking. Make men's spaces great again. You'll notice that when the gentlemen's clubs went, the feminist takeover of society and so on really did a number on people. And I mentioned how feminism and socialism and femininity and so on are linked and so on, and matriarchy and so on. You know, start mocking people for being undesirable. I know I'm not talking about people that want to be desirable and are actually making decent efforts to be desirable. I mean viciously mocking those who are 30 years old women who don't want family and want a career and so on. Be like, oh, you want to be important, but you have no children. Curious. You know what I mean? Um, kind of like nagging them into having children, basically. Make it a badge of shame not to have children. And I know that's kind of cruel to those who don't have children yet, but like the 18-year-old boys and men and stuff like that. But it needs to be the goal, and shaming people is the tactic. We already have elements of this or primitive instincts towards this with the term soy boy and man child and empty egg carton and so on. It's going to be extra hard on the feminists who are 50 who don't have children and they regret it already and they're rubbing the salt into their wounds and so on. You might want to avoid doing that for them who are honest and go, I regret being like that, and are trying to actually help the next generation of women actually find calling and having children. So be discretionary in that regard. But the ones that are still locked in the system need to be shamed out of it, basically. And make having children and raising them well to be the mark of success for men and women, typically, but mostly women, and careers for men, basically. Now, Schuon Head did a program on the whole male loser epidemic thing, and basically she was going well, you stack the system against them, so no wonder they're losers. You rigged the game against them. And she's got a point about that with Fox News even going oh, boy, men are just losers nowadays. And it's you rigged the game against them, no wonder they are. So the next step is also, or this is part of the same step as shaming people for being stupid, splitting the post-war consensus. The next thing is also to start purposefully calling companies that hire lots of women failures to be in waiting, basically. Point out that female-driven companies completely screw up. What is Fallout, for instance, right? What is Half-Life? You have these 20, 30-year-old game series that were so good, and they were started by 30, 40 men in gaming. And it's okay, and now they're $8,800 people companies who can't make a product to save their lives. What if you popularize the phrase, women don't work, men make mastery, or men master women work. Or like, women shouldn't work, men need mastery. And you could mean that in both the sense that women shouldn't be in the workplace and men need to be in control of it and so on. Or you could also mean that they don't actually do the job for women in women's case, and men tend to make experts, not just experts TM, but like actual experts in their field of study and operation in the job market and careers and so on. Women don't work, men need mastery. And there's a dual meaning to that I just explained and so on. So you could start using that phrase or something like that, and like empty egg carton and so on. I guess I'm just outlining the things that exist already, so that might be what the video is about, basically. I haven't really done enough thought. I haven't wrapped my head around it. I don't blame myself for not doing that yet, because no one else has really done it. The exact strategic sort of like, they'll do this at this point, and then you do this to counter them, or they'll do that at that point, and you'll do this to counter them, and so on. No one's gotten that point yet. And that's what I'm going to be trying to do in the future. So I'm just outlining the situation, and maybe at the end of this video I'll get to that point a little bit or something like that. You'll notice that catchy slogans might be more important. There's a few of them out there and so on a little bit. But women don't work, men need mastery. Bros before hoes, misters before sisters. Total pedo death, pedo death. Great replacement, white genocide. Those kinds of phrases have punch to them, and that's one of the reasons why the left fears them so much. What else? Older, successful men with families, especially social media influencers, if they want to help the right wing win, then they need to start investing into explaining the details of masculinity in certain situations by their experience of success and failure in their own lives, I think. Sharing their wisdom with the younger generation, and a little bit of bridging or relatability to their situation and so on. Because if you're just entertaining, you're like, oh, top G, I pimped out women and I got millions and I scam people and so on. That's not exactly a how-to for most people who have a decent moral set on some level, at least. But I'm willing to bet a lot of successful YouTubers and stuff like that on the right wing do have that capacity on some level. What else? I would say it's a weapon of the right wing to assume the entire Western world's leadership is on the Epstein list, and to act like it, because they certainly act like it, even if they're not. So it's like, okay, taint the left and the Uniparty and the rhinos in America, and whoever's the equivalent in the UK or Britain or Canada or Australia or Germany or France or Spain, the same way, basically. Just propagandize it. Doesn't matter if it's true or not, because it's almost guaranteed to be somewhat true. Not literally everyone, but like a lot of people. And they're probably doing what they're doing because they're predators naturally, which is why they're at Epstein Island, or they're like they got some dirt on them, and they're doing what they're told to by puppeteers and so on. What else? Reestablishing the there's a word for this. The honorability of being on your side, basically. Advertise that your side is best and the real worldview that people need for success. You have to advertise your worldview as better than theirs constantly, because that's how the left won their thing. And you can point to it and say, oh, what about this? What about that? And what about that? But if you don't advertise your own worldview as better, specifically as better, beat your chest a bunch about how much better your worldview is and so on. And don't just use examples, but be like, this is just evidence of our worldview being better. You know, the right wing is better because it actually cares about people, not money or something like that. You know what I mean? Just flip the script on the usual previous leftist tropes that got them into power in the first place, of being against the system and being against tyranny and all that stuff. I mean, Arch Warhammer, or the Archcast, has a banner on the YouTube page for videos and so on that says, "We are the rebels, join us." And it's like, you know, like add a sense of romance, almost like Romance of the Three Kingdoms romance, not necessarily like lovey-dovey stuff. Romanticism to your vibes in regards to your worldview and so on. Mystery, bravado. But it has to be based in reality on some level. It can't just be like pure like fiction. It has to be embodied by you on some level. It just has to be advertised as well, basically, I think. Now, granted, that last one might be me being false, but I would like to offer it up for consideration for an attempt in case I'm right, and so on. Money talks, bullshit walks is a statement that goes counter to what I was saying about the advertising in some ways, and chest beating. But if you're really successful and you know what you're doing and you're actually like right about it, then chest beating and chest thumping and so on makes a bit of sense. You know, like even the slop channels do decently well because they're like, oh hey, I was right about this, I was right about that, I was right about that, and so on. You know, and granted that's part of the slop process in a sense, but at the same time it actually works on some level and so on. It's good to tally your skills and strengths up so that people aren't like just like, how do I put this? One of the things about the right wing that makes it so strong in some ways is that it never brags. It doesn't really brag a lot. It just does, and a lot of its support sees that it just does things without bragging and goes, "That's some honest business." But at the same time, it's like, if you've done things that you're proud of, be honest about them, right? So that people can look into it and be like, oh, hey, he actually did that, and so on. Oh, wow, he's right about that, and that, and that, and that. You know? Call attention to your strengths, and people will flock to you and join you, because if you're the real deal, they'll see that you actually did it, basically. You know. Um, Now, granted, some of this might only apply to lesser intelligent people, or people who haven't followed you for a while. It might even alienate people that have followed you for a while. And that's what I'm worried about to some extent, because you got a good solid core of believers and so on, because you've been walking the walk, not talking the talk. Like, that might be why they follow you. But some degree of advertisement might be necessary, and I realize that's a slippery slope, because some people are all talk, no walk. But if you keep it to things that you're actually proud of, like that are like you're really proud of, and it's like relatively solid to talk about, and you don't talk about it always, but you sort of like, maybe you make like a single video that people can link to or something like that, about how right you are about things and so on. Then you might be able to get away with advertising yourself and chest thumping and so on. But make it clear, concise, and full of truth that people can verify if they look into it even slightly, and so on. Yeah. What else? Initiation rituals into the masculine for men and the feminine for women is important, and how do I put this? First, they have to recognize you have superior wisdom, or something they don't have that makes you successful and not them. That's kind of what the advertisement is basically about, and so on. You know, and also talk about what would happen if everyone was like them, or everyone was like you, in terms of good and bad, what's better or worse. Talk about as if everyone was like you and everyone was like them, and what would happen. Make the case that more of your way is better and less of their way is better. More of their way is bad, less of your way is bad. But like, point it out, basically, that it is that. You know, basically just sort of like actually openly declare that you're doing what you're doing, basically, when you're doing it, in terms of propaganda and so on. So that way people are like, oh, he's a man of his word, and boy, does he have something to say about us. And I don't like it, but I can't argue with him, and so on. And part of this is going to require not being too full of guile necessarily, but like a certain understanding of guile without engaging in it, so that you can catch it and then stomp on it hard, and like pin them down, and like define them out of existence, basically, or like insult them until they hide their faces and never post again, or something like that. Maybe not quite that hostile, but like for certain people, but like if enough people do it on average to everyone, it's really about discouraging the enemy from speaking, basically, so that there's no counter propaganda to our worldview and so on. That's why they hate. That's why the hate speech legislation exists and so on. to prevent us from doing that because they know that shaming works. Okay, I failed to come up with a step-by-step process, but I hope I outlined some first steps to this whole program, and I'll continue to do so, and maybe eventually I'll work out a master plan. Sorry about that misleading thing in the beginning. It's honestly a big task because like you have to take into account all the little details and the mechanisms and the clockwork and intricate details for like the entire West. It's like you might as well define God at that point. You know what I mean? So, so I'm biting off more than I can chew, I guess. Typical me. Sorry for false advertising and so on.